Welcome to Season 8 of Village's Vitality Life, Seniors Life Unscripted. Our podcast used to be called Open Forum in the Villages, Florida. In this new season, we talk to leaders of clubs and interesting folks who live in and around the villages. We also talk to people who have information vital to seniors. You will get perspectives of what is happening in and around the villages, Florida. In addition, in this new season, we will add more information for all seniors. We are a listener-supported podcast.
This is Mike Roth on Open Forum in the Villages, Florida. I'm here today with Dr. Craig Curtis. Thanks for joining me, Craig.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
Today we're going to be talking about Alzheimer's diseases and maybe a few other brain diseases.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.
I heard you're working on Lewy body as well.
There have been some recent advances in studying Lewy body dementia and in detecting Lewy body dementia. So that's allowing us now to at least move into the field of Lewy body dementia and looking at medications that might help someday.
How does Lewy body dementia get diagnosed?
So currently, it's a clinical diagnosis. So if you think about a disease, whether it's diabetes or whether it's an illness such as Lewy body dementia, you have two main ways. You can either use diagnostic testing, such as in diabetes, we would actually look at someone's blood sugar or potentially check their hemoglobin A1C, which can tell us what their blood sugars have been running. And then we can combine that with symptoms such as frequent urination or frequent thirst, and we can say, yes, that person has diabetes. But what was critical was the diagnostic testing.
Right.
When it comes to most neurological disorders, especially the neurodegenerative disorders, we are seriously, unfortunately, lacking in diagnostic tests. For example, in Alzheimer's disease, we now have a blood test. We have a PET scan that we can use to actually see the agents.
Amyloid?
Yeah, I didn't want to get that technical. Yes, that we can actually see amyloid, which we believe causes Alzheimer's disease. So combining that diagnostic test with the clinical symptoms of memory loss and forgetfulness and trouble finding words, we can make the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease with high accuracy. In the case of Lewy body dementia, it's much more difficult because we do not have a diagnostic test. All we can do is go by clinical symptoms.
Okay. What differentiates Lewy body from Alzheimer's?
So it's caused by a completely different protein buildup. In Alzheimer's disease, there's a protein called amyloid that builds up, leading to the death of brain cells in the memory area of our brain. In Lewy body dementia, it's a buildup of a protein called alpha-synuclein that builds up in the cortex, the outside part of the brain, that damages initially, usually our emotional side of the brain. So we do tend to see emotional changes in patients with then go on to have memory problems later on, and they can be diagnosed with Lewy body dementia. But it's a disease where we diagnose looking at clinical symptoms and makes it very challenging. For example, in the old days, 20 years ago and beyond, even in Alzheimer's disease, even the best experts in the world only had around a 75% accuracy of diagnosing using just clinical symptoms. And it usually took an average of 3 to 4 years of symptoms to where they felt confident enough calling it something such as Alzheimer's dementia. But if that person were to ever go to autopsy, they were only accurate around 75% of the time.
Yeah.
And now we're in the high 90s as far as accuracy.
That's because of the blood tests and the PET scans.
Blood tests, PET scans, et cetera. So correct in Alzheimer's dementia. But in Lewy body dementia, unfortunately, we do not have a reliable scan. We do not have a reliable blood test. I will say in Parkinson's disease, which is caused by the same bad protein that causes Lewy body dementia. But in Parkinson's disease, that protein builds up in the brain stem as opposed to the rest of the brain, the outside part of the brain. When it builds up in the brain stem, it leads to Parkinson's disease. That we can now test with spinal fluid reliably.
Oh, really?
Yes. About a year ago now, the University of Pennsylvania and the Michael J. Fox Foundation released the results of a study using what they call a seed amplification assay. which is a test that uses a few drops of spinal fluid where they look for that alpha-synuclein protein. It's kind of like building a snowman. You know how you start with a small snowball and you
Right.
roll it and it gets bigger and bigger to where it's then finally big enough that maybe somebody a half a mile away could see it if you built a big enough snowball?
Sure.
Well, imagine the same thing in the spinal fluid. We're looking for seeds that are really, really tiny. And what they've found out they need to do is take these seeds, combine them with millions of other seeds, essentially roll the snowball to where it gets big enough that we can detect it with modern equipment.
Okay, so that gives a good diagnostic tool in the case of Parkinson's.
In the case of Parkinson's. Now, that should work for Lewy body dementia as well because it is caused by the same protein. It's just that the studies have not been done yet. So those studies are, we hope, starting soon. And I think there are also some studies ongoing currently looking at that.
Okay, Dr. Curtis, are there any changes in the direction of Alzheimer's research?
There have been some very important studies that have started recently. One in particular that I'd like to highlight is with a new antibody called trontinemab. And they've re-engineered sort of the existing antibodies that we're using to treat Alzheimer's dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Scientists have re-engineered that antibody, and so it appears to be much more effective and much safer.
Oh, that's important.
Yeah, can I explain?
Sure.
So currently, the antibodies that are on the market, the medications that slow Alzheimer's disease, they only slow Alzheimer's disease around 30% after 18 months. And they do have a pretty significant side effect, brain swelling and occasionally brain bleeding. And these new antibodies, in particular trontinemab, appears to be about 10 to 15 times safer and remarkably removes the amyloid in about 3 to 4 months versus about 1 year to 18 months on the existing medications. So this is a really significant breakthrough. It's currently in clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
The good news is we're in the final phase. That study began about a month ago in late December 2025 and will enroll approximately 1,500 people across the United States and in other countries. And we will treat those patients for about 18 months. And hopefully we'll see good results at the end. But that's really important. The safety factor, we think it's going to end up being, the early reports show that it's about 10 times safer than the current medications on the market and appears to be significantly faster, maybe 10 times faster as well.
Wow. Are they looking at that as a preventative as well?
So in about 2 months, we will start a very large prevention trial. We'll once again look for people between the ages of 55 and 80 who do not have any memory problems, cognitive concerns, and we will test them with a blood test to see if that is positive. And if so, they can screen into the research study to see if the PET scan is positive for amyloid. And at that point, the prevention study would begin, and half the people will get the medicine, half the people will receive placebo. And we'll follow them for 18 months and see if that slows down progression.
Okay, so that's going to be a typical double-blind study.
It will be, yes. All these studies at this point are still double-blind studies.
Are there any breakthroughs in the area of treatment for people who have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's?
Let's take a quick break.
Have you heard about Mature Adults with Donna Hoover and Mike Roth? Yes, this is my second podcast, and Donna and I are going to be addressing subjects which are significant for seniors, especially seniors living here in the villages. The easiest way to hear the show is to look it up on Apple Podcasts. Look for Mature Adults with Donna and Mike. We'll be looking for you there. You can also find us on Mature Adults with Donna and Mike, all spelled out, @buzzsprout.com.
We currently have the 2 medications approved in the last couple of years that do remove amyloid, that do slow progression of the disease approximately 30%. However, they come with about a 30% risk of brain bleeds and brain swelling. And so those are significant risks. We're still fortunate to have those medications, but we know that there are better ones on the way.
You wanted to talk about vascular. Why don't you go ahead and tell our listeners about that? Would
love to. Thanks. So I'll start with the question. Have you ever known someone who unfortunately had a heart attack or vascular disease or maybe a stroke that seemed to be a little bit early?
Sure. A lot of people here in the villages.
So when we talk about the causes of heart attacks and strokes and peripheral vascular disease, we all know about things such as diabetes and smoking and poor diet choices. Those are all called modifiable risk factors. So you can change those and you can lower your risk. And then if we talk about non-modifiable risk factors, things you cannot change, there's a cholesterol that has been labeled the ghost cholesterol.
Well, I've heard of good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. Now I have to worry about a ghost cholesterol?
That's right. So there's a cholesterol called Lp(a), otherwise known as lipoprotein A. And that cholesterol has been known about for a long time. However, scientists over the last decade have discovered that this is one of the major risk factors for heart disease, cardiovascular disease, cerebral vascular disease such as strokes, and peripheral vascular disease such as problems in the legs. And what they've discovered is that this is a genetically linked lipoprotein.
It runs in families?
It runs in families. Yes, it does. And unfortunately, we've had no way to modify this. So what we've discovered is that people with high values will have about a 6 times higher risk of having heart disease, cerebral vascular disease, such as strokes. And this ghost cholesterol, we've had a blood test for a while, about 15 years that can detect it. And what we told people is that if your cardiologist checked this and your value was high, they would just modify your modifiable risk factors. They would say, well, it looks like you're very high risk for potential heart attacks or strokes, so let's lower your cholesterol, bad cholesterol down as low as we can. Please stop smoking if you're a smoker. Engage in diet and exercise, other healthy habits to try to make your modifiable risk factors as good as they can be, because there was nothing we could do about this, about your genetics. And unfortunately, the fact that you might have a high lipoprotein A. What's exciting is now we're studying a medication, a pill actually, that lowers lipoprotein A by around 85%.
Wow, that's a big drop.
It's a huge drop. And this study was published about a year ago. And this was a small study with only around 500 people that lasted about 1 year. Now that we know we can successfully lower lipoprotein A, we're moving on to a huge global study in 26 countries involving 13,000 people with elevated lipoprotein A. So we're going to screen about 100,000 people across the world for this, because only about 1 in 5, 1 in 8 will have a high enough level of lipoprotein A for the clinical research study. And if we find someone with the very high value, they'll go on the medication or on placebo for 5 years. And it's called an outcome study. We're actually going to follow these people to see if reducing Lp(a) or lipoprotein A actually reduces their risk of having a major adverse cardiac event.
It's going to be a big double-blind study.
Big double-blind study. Very, very important. It's probably one of the greatest advancements in the last 40 years in cardiology, because we've all known people who have had early heart disease or had vascular problems, had carotid problems, blockages in their carotid arteries. And this occurred in people that did not smoke, that did not have diabetes. And we really never knew why for the longest time. We just thought, oh, poor genetics, and there was nothing we could do. And now really keying in on this lipoprotein A, I think is going to be the next very, very important medical breakthrough in cardiology and reducing vascular disease, which ties into Alzheimer's disease. About 20-25% of patients with Alzheimer's disease have some hardening of the arteries in the brain, some slight, maybe mild to moderate vascular disease in the brain. We don't think necessarily that causes Alzheimer's disease, but we think it can make Alzheimer's disease worse. So therefore, if we find a way to improve their vascular, what we call endothelium, which is their blood vessels essentially, then maybe you can slow the course of Alzheimer's disease or slow the course of Parkinson's disease if the rest of the blood vessels in the brain can be that much healthier, especially if it's due to elevated lipoprotein A.
Right. So with someone who wasn't in the study, would going on a vegetarian diet cause that lipoprotein A to go down?
No, unfortunately, diet has no effect on lipoprotein A, right? This is a non-modifiable risk factor. Statins do not drop lipoprotein A to any significant effect. Now, the new medicines that have come out for statins, they call them PCSK9 inhibitors long-term, but those medications do lipoprotein A levels around 20%. So not very much, and it's a very expensive and time-consuming way to lower lipoprotein A around 20%. So those medicines are not currently approved to lower lipoprotein A. They're just not very effective. They do a little bit. So you cannot lower this via diet, via exercise, complete vegan or healthy diet. So yeah, that's why this is so important to finally have a pill that could potentially lower lipoprotein A. So this study's going to take a few years. It's going to take us the next probably 6 years to get the study done. But the good news is we're offering that test to people. They can come and get the blood test. If they have risk factors, they have to have 3 risk factors.
What are the 3 risk factors?
Well, there's a long list of factors, but 3 of the most common would be over the age of 65, have diabetes, or high blood pressure on treatment, or high cholesterol on treatment. Diabetes with poor kidney function would be another one. So we are looking for people with risk factors, and they do need to have a couple of risk factors in order to get into the clinical trial or get the blood test.
A little unusual looking for people who are much sicker than normal.
Well, we need to do that because they're at higher risk of having a cardiac event in the next 5 years. The trial we can't run a trial forever because we'll have too many people dropping out and it will lead to an ineffective trial design. So in order to set a 5-year window for the trial, we do need people that are at risk of having a cardiac event because that will help us figure out if those on the drug have less cardiac events than those on placebo who might have more cardiac events. It's unfortunately the only way we can do the research study.
Good. Let me ask you a couple of questions, Dr. Curtis. There's been a lot of talk about hyperbaric oxygen helping the brain. What's your opinion on that?
I actually have a very favorable opinion on that. I think that hyperbaric oxygen, the data looks good behind hyperbaric oxygen as far as for helping the brain that might need some help, you might have a condition such as a stroke or other neurological condition. What I don't have is a double-blind placebo-controlled study showing 2 identical groups and statistically powered to show outcome. But the concept to me and the science to me seems like it's good science. I just don't have a double-blind study to really base a full opinion on at this time.
Because there are 3 outfits here in the villages offering hyperbaric. 3.
Wow. Well, because the science is good behind it, and there are good case studies behind it. The problem is we need a double-blind, placebo-controlled, decently long-term study.
There are a couple of other things that are kicking around here. One is stem cells. What is your opinion of stem cells?
My opinion on stem cells are that, once again, I think the data, the science behind stem cells looks promising. There have been studies in mice using stem cells that also appear promising, but we don't have large randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials in stem cells. So therefore, I think that it's a potential promising future for stem cells, but we don't know how much to give and where to give. So it's going to take a few more years. This science takes a long time to get done.
Mm-hmm. And there are other practitioners offering peptides with administration patches.
Yeah, once again, we just don't have any double-blind placebo-controlled trials on peptides as well. And a lot of these things can appear to be effective for a short while, and then we see in the long term that they actually did not do any good. I'm not saying they're not, because I don't know. I'm not an expert in that area. But I'm excited for the future for what we are looking at, though.
Right. There's a lot of anecdotal stories that show success. And I've also heard anecdotal stories of people who say, didn't work for me. And the same thing is true for blood-rich plasma transfusions there.
PR, platelet-rich plasma, sure. Yeah, that also sounds promising. Take out of the blood, spin the blood down, use the pro-growth proteins, et cetera, and inject that into an arthritic joint or something, and it seems very plausible. But it seems to be falling by the wayside, the PRP. The studies, I don't think, really support the use. They have done some double-blind studies. They have, and I think I haven't looked at that. I would like to see if there's been anything done with that recently, because they did look at that in some double-blind studies, and I think it was essentially not really any different than placebo at the end of the day.
Yeah, I heard that several people that plain didn't work.
And, go back 10 years and that's all they were talking about was PRP.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, unfortunately, science takes decades sometimes to figure things out. I know we don't have decades.
Well, people are looking for a cure today, and people have been told that stem cells injected into your knee will do better than a cortisone shot.
Well, the FDA has not approved it for a reason, and we're still waiting.
Yeah, the FDA rules seem to be very strict in that the stem cells from a donated placenta from a woman can only be used if the woman never took a COVID shot because of the RNA.
Really?
Yes.
Did not know that.
Oh.
Wow. I know there's a company in Orlando that they're involved in harvesting stem cells and selling mostly out of the country, I believe. But,
yeah. Well, that's another problem in terms of chain of custody. How do you know where those stem cells came from? Were they from a goat or when it's harvested from a placenta? Well, that couldn't have come from me. But was it a goat or a human? Was that human being ever administered an RNA vaccine for COVID?
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that. mRNA should not stay in the system. To my knowledge, it doesn't interfere with DNA,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not an expert in that field, so I'll hold comment on that.
Okay. Yeah, there are 3 hyperbaric chambers here.
3?
Yes.
I thought there was just 1.
Avi has the best one.
Yeah.
There's the Wound Care Center up in Lady Lake.
Well, so that is FDA approved for diabetic wounds.
Yeah.
So that's why I like the science behind it. It definitely works. It heals wounds faster.
Well, that's one of the problems in the anecdotal evidence, no double-blind study, but I ran into a friend who was having a wound, and he was saying to me that it wasn't working.
I thought that it did work, and it was part of wound treatment, standard wound treatment. I could be wrong, but I thought it was.
Yeah, I didn't know the whole story behind it. Just caught it in a brief part of a conversation. The third one is a new center on 44 here called Sozo. They have a 4-person hyperbaric chamber that actually is very low cost compared to Avi. Oh, yeah, like 10% of Avi's cost. I understand they're about $55,000.
No idea.
And these guys are about $4,000.
You're kidding.
No.
Wow.
No, man. I actually went over last week and sat in the chamber.
What'd you think?
Well, it was a big metal tube. It had 4 comfortable chairs in it. They only have 1, and they have 1 technician operating it. But it seemed as safe as the Avi chamber.
Yeah.
Certainly not as luxurious.
Yeah.
But you're only going to be in there for an hour at a time.
Yeah. I just wish we knew how much time and how long you should spend in there. I wish we knew those answers. That would be really nice to know.
Right. And I do know one Avi patient who was there about a year and a half ago who did get better and is now getting worse again.
Yeah.
So I think there's some additional follow-on treatment with hyperbaric oxygen that has to be a regimen. Maybe not like insulin where you have to take it every day.
Well, maybe so.
Well,
I mean, if you could do it,
give me a quick shot of oxygen.
yeah, every day for,
Well, for the rest of your life.
yeah, for the rest of your life, sure.
But if that kept your brain
Sign me
healthy, yeah. There have been some studies that people have talked about using GLP-1 drugs to help Alzheimer's. What's the story on that?
So that was breaking news a few months ago. They released the results that showed it was not a positive study, which means there was no statistical difference between the placebo group and those that received GLP-1s for the length of the trial, which was approximately 2 years. Now, what they did find is that those on the GLP-1s did have trending biomarkers. The levels of tau and amyloid seemed to be moving in the right direction. So it's possible they didn't receive the treatment long enough. Maybe a 2-year trial was not enough, sort of what we just referenced. In hyperbaric oxygen, maybe you need it for a longer amount of time.
Yeah, longer than 3 months.
Longer than 3 months. So there's going to be more data released at a big meeting coming up in Copenhagen in March that I'll be attending, called the Alzheimer's PD International Parkinson's Disease International Meeting. And they're going to release more information about the biomarkers in that study and whether or not they will do more. So stay tuned. I don't think they quite have answers yet, but the overall study was a failure if you want to look at it from a totality or the study in full.
Yeah, but the study kind of indicates from what you're saying that they need an additional study to go beyond 2 years.
And those studies are very expensive, $400 million. So we'll see if they're willing to do it. So many people are on GLP-1s nowadays, it's probably getting harder to find people to enter a study like that are naive to GLP-1s.
Yeah, I know I'm not in favor of GLP-1s. It's that side effect that you can go blind on it.
Rare, but it does appear that there's a little something to keep our eyes on. Get it? Keep our eye on.
Yes. This isn't a comedy podcast, but just in case.
Right.
This podcast was listed as number 15 on the Florida Comedy Podcast list.
Really?
We have had a few comedy podcasts in the batch, but I was very surprised that...
Good to laugh. Comedy's good for you.
That's right. So is there anything else you want to add, Dr. Curtis?
No, thank you for having me today. That was a very wonderful to be here and to share some news on the vascular front and on the Alzheimer's front. So thank you very much.
Dr. Curtis, if someone wants to contact your firm, K2 Medical Research, how do they do that?
Well, we're right here in the Villages in Lady Lake, and our office number is 352-500-5252.
Okay. And is there a website they can go to?
There is, k2medicalresearch.com.
And how many new studies do you think you're going to undertake this year?
Approximately 6 to 7 new studies this year. The vascular and the cardiometabolic space is really big, and that's important for us. That encompasses a lot of different diseases.
I know when we first talked, you said you don't have any overnight patients or overnight studies. Has that changed?
Well, we do have one for Alzheimer's and one for Parkinson's currently, but those are only a single overnight study. But those are early studies looking at the way these medications work. They're called phase 1 studies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks very much, Dr. Curtis.
Thank you, Mike.
Remember, our next episode will be released next Friday at 9 a.m. Should you want to become a major supporter of the show or have questions, please contact us at mike@rothvoice.com. This is a shout-out for supporters: Tweet Coleman, Ed Williams, Duane Romick, Paul Sorgan, and Dr. Craig Curtis at K2 in the Villages. We will be hearing more from Dr. Curtis with short Alzheimer's tips each week. If you know someone who should be on the show, contact us at mike@rothvoice.com. Use the fan mail button on our homepage, villagesvitalitylife.com, to leave comments. Be sure to include your name, email, and phone number. The way our show grows is with your help. Text your friends about this show if you enjoyed listening. The content of the show is copyrighted by Roth Voice 2026, all rights reserved.